So many women that I work with will tell me that they are not perfectionists. They just have high standards. They like to do things really well and they, just really want the best for themselves. And in the same breath, they will tell me about the workout that they skipped and felt guilty about for, I don't know, a week later, or the meal that they had to eat out that was off plan that they felt like derailed their entire week, or that they were bad and they need to overcompensate, or the tracking app that they downloaded and then abandoned, 3 days later because they couldn't track something perfectly. So they thought, why do this at all? But to them, it's just high standards. To me, it is perfectionism, and it's a learned behavior and one of the mindsets that completely stands in the way of you being successful. If this is ringing true for you, welcome back to the Mindset Mirror Connection podcast. Welcome to the Mindset Mirror Connection podcast, the podcast where we have honest conversations about food, body, exercise, and mindset. I'm your host, Christina Hathaway, licensed associate marriage and family therapist with specialized training in food and body obsession, certified personal trainer and nutrition coach. And we have candid conversations about how your mind, your body, and your identity are one integrated system and teach you how to treat it accordingly. So if you're a high-performing individual who loves educational, thoughtful, and no bullshit conversations around health and wellness, you're in the right place. Here we believe what you say in your mind, you see in the mirror. So let's have a conversation about that. Welcome back, guys. I am so excited you took this time out for yourself to learn something about your physical and mental health. And today we're going to talk about perfectionism and what it actually looks like in high-performing, high-achieving women, where it comes from and what it does to your body and what it takes to start moving away from it. Not perfectly, just honestly. This is by far, based on my clientele, the major mindset fuck that messes with their heads and causes them to derail their progress. And now I want you to realize this is not about the woman who color codes her planner. She's not the woman who has everything folded perfectly in her closet, even though it might be. Perfectionism in high achieving women is quieter and much more dangerous than that, honestly. It shows up as the all or nothing relationship with food and exercise. If the plan isn't followed exactly to the T, the whole day or week is written off. It's the inability to rest without justifying that rest. It's that constant background noise of not doing enough, not being enough, not looking enough like the version of yourself you decided you were supposed to be by now. And research from 2023 found that women and marginalized groups face a brutal double standard, having to be essentially perfect just to be seen as competent. That external pressure gets internalized very quickly. And once it lives inside of you, you stop needing anyone else to apply it. You apply it to yourself. Research identifies two types of perfectionism, and I want you guys to hear that it can be a good thing. Adaptive perfectionism means setting high standards without being hard on yourself when you fall short. Whereas maladaptive perfectionism combines these high standards with harsh self-criticism, the fear of failure, procrastination, because nothing even feels good enough or ever feels good enough to begin with. Adaptive perfectionism can build things like your career, your success in life, whereas maladaptive perfectionism, which is the one that most high achieving, high performing women struggle with, is actually someone living with anxiety, can cause depression, and can cause burnout. The problem is they feel identical from the inside. And what drives maladaptive perfectionism is not ambition, it's identity. The standard is not something you are chasing. It is something you believe you have to be in order to be acceptable. That distinction between the two is literally everything and is exactly what I want to unpack today. But like always, let's talk about where it comes from, because perfectionism doesn't just appear out of nowhere. Research shows us that the early experiences that made us feel unsafe in our lives. And when I say unsafe, guys, I'm not always talking about abuse. It could just be a parent who's not consistently there, a parent who doesn't know how to regulate their emotions, a parent who is depressed or an addict, right? those can make us feel unsafe or at a minimum not good enough, right? And what this does is it leaves the brain with this internal threat detector stuck in the state of chronic activation, or like the on switch is consistently on, meaning every single small mistake or moment of criticism registers as this like 5 alarm fire. Oh my God, the ship is wrecking. I just watched that Netflix Shipwrecked. That was crazy. It comes from the environments where love and approval feels conditional to you, right? We always talk about unconditional love. Think this is conditional love, where being good was how you stayed safe, right? Where achievement was the currency of feeling like you belonged. It comes from industries as well, social media feeds, of course, and fitness cultures that reward performance of having it all together while privately suffering. And we still do this to this day. And I talk to you guys about this often, that, we are congratulating women. Recently, in the past couple of days, Ariana Grande came out that she's taking a step back because, and in her words, she says it's to, walk away from these criticisms around her health and her body. But really, she got to a point where that need to look perfect was now, instead of being this quiet thing on the inside, was being exposed on the outside by this frail, depleted, burnt out human being. Even though I don't know how that girl still keeps going, I'm going to guess that there's some stimulants involved with that. But we praise her up until the point that then we then criticize her. So then there's that double standard again, right? And she's still relatively young, and research shows that young people today score significantly higher on perfectionism measures than they did 30 plus years ago. And we argue that it's not now a personality trend of perfectionism, it is a cultural trend. And you didn't develop perfectionism because something, is wrong with you. You developed it because something around you taught you it was the only way to be good or feel okay. And over time, that lesson stopped feeling like a learned behavior and started feeling like your identity, like who you are. And that's exactly what makes it so hard to fucking let go of. And that is exactly what the ego wants you to do, which I'm going to talk about with you. I personally struggle with perfectionism in certain areas of my life. I've talked a lot about, my own healing process, but when I was in my perfectionism identity, everything needed to be perfect. My hair, my clothes. I remember being young, and if I did not feel like I looked put together, I would spend my money that I didn't have to buy an outfit to change into to then look the part that I, in my head, made up about myself, right? I had to do the workout to the T, the plan to the T. Now, for me, my perfectionism never really had the nothing switch. It had the all, all, all. I would push myself until literally when I'd stand up, I would be lightheaded because I would just keep pushing and pushing. My nothing came in forms of emotional terrorism rather and alcohol abuse. And so I would still exercise hard, eat nothing, go out with my friends, and then that's where the nothing would come out, and more like being mean to people and angry. And that was a big wake up call for me. And the loop that I'm about to talk about is my experience. And I wanted to dig a little bit deeper on like what is happening from an ego state. And a lot of people will teach you the perfectionism loop, but like why? Right? What is happening on an internal mindset basis that makes this feel more than like a pattern and a true, and I can say this for myself, a deep rooted need is not even the word. Force. It was a force that I had to let go of. And like I said, today perfectionism shows up. I'm getting a lot better with it. Like in social media, I was like, oh, I need to say the exact thing so that this thing will pop off. Nothing pops off other than my dancing, stupid dancing reel. They got like millions of views. In certain places, for example, I was in Belgium at Tomorrowland and I had this vision of this outfit and it turned out almost there. I wanted this like 90s Aaliyah look. The outfit was great, but my hair, I put it in those little like, remember back in the day, you'd put your hair in those little like rolls, like, I don't know what you call them, like little ponytails, like right at the crown. And there would be like 6 across your head. I did that, but it just wasn't working, but it was fine. We kept it. Everyone was fine. But things like that, I still get a little bit of that perfectionistic vibe. Another thing I get really perfectionistic about is when I throw parties, I always create these spreads and in my head, the spread has to look a certain way. So Mark loves it. But let's talk about the perfectionism loop so that you can be aware of what it is. So I'm going to walk you through an example. Let's do, you're trying to eat clean, right? This is something I've been hearing a lot lately, especially because I just got back from Italy and I love the food there. And I'm kind of back into this, like, why don't I just eat like an Italian or someone in the Mediterranean diet? Anyways, eating clean Monday through Friday. We'll use that as our goal. So you set the plan, right? Step 1 is creating an unreachable standard or a standard that, you know, in your head feels reachable, but really it's unrealistic when it comes to your actual life, right? So when we're talking about eating clean, we're not just talking about clean eating here and there. We're talking about perfectly clean eating, no exceptions, every meal prepped, every calorie counted for, nothing off plan. The standard you might think is very ambitious, but you're an ambitious woman. So duh, obviously I'm going to be able to do this. It's not ambitious, babe. This shit's impossible. It is impossible, but it feels like the only version worth doing because anything less than this impossible standard feels like it's not good enough for you. Let me say that again. You choose these high standards because your ego and your identity says, I am this. I am a hard worker. I'm better than everyone else. That was one that I struggle with. Like, I can do things that other people can't do. And that ego drove the standard. Okay. So let's just dive into that. The ego writes the story for you, right? And the interesting thing about the ego is it protects our wounded self. So before I talk about the ego, I got to talk about the wounded self. So the wounded self is that part of you that is very wounded. It's really sad. My words are not coming to me. It is a very low, dark place. It's where all of your insecurities live. So your wounded part of yourself, because of your upbringing, says, I have to do this perfectly or I am not enough. So the wounded part's theme is I am not enough, right? The ego says, no, we're going to do it perfectly. And I'm going to create these high standards. And that's how we're going to get through this, knowing that you're still going to fail. Okay. So the ego says, it creates the story. And it's not, I'm going to eat well this week, right? It's never that. The story is, I am someone who is disciplined, someone who is in control at all times, someone who does not quit. The plan is not just a plan. It is evidence of who you are. And who you are cannot afford to be wrong. Why? Because then it triggers the wounded part of yourself that the ego is trying to protect. The high standard also quietly protects the ego before anything even begins. If the bar is set so high that failure is almost guaranteed, the ego has an exit ramp. Ready? Right? It says, I didn't fail because I was weak or I'm not good enough. I failed because the standard was extraordinary. The perfectionist gets to be the person who aims higher than everyone else, which feels like identity even before a single action is taken. So, one of two things can happen. Either that wounded self is triggered, or we create such a high standard that we know we are not going to be able to hit. And we say, well, that's the reason. Or there's the middle, there's the me who's just like, well, I'll just push harder, which we'll talk about here. Step 2 in this loop is the inevitable. It's when you slip, when you fuck up, right? Wednesdays are always the time. Wednesdays are crazy for my parents that I work with who are working parents. You're exhausted, right? You're out with, you've got one kid in soccer, you have a colleague dinner, you eat something that was not on your plan. It wasn't a binge. It was just a meal, like a human ass normal meal. Are you tired of wasting your money on diet and exercise program that leave you feeling pretty much the same? You're spinning your wheels, but the food noise is still there, the body dysmorphia, the overtraining and not seeing results, the emotional eating, it's all still there. But you don't think you have an option because they're pretty much all the same. What if the next program you invest in combines therapeutic practice with exercise and nutrition science and behavioral change? What if this program focuses on what you say in your mind so that you can have a better relationship on what you see in the mirror? Hi, I'm Christina Hathaway, licensed therapist with specialized training in food and body obsession, certified personal trainer and nutrition coach, and I'm the founder of the Mindset and Matter coaching program. Here, we see your mind, your body, and your identity as one integrated system and treat it as such. We focus on your self-defeating beliefs and understand how they impact your behaviors and thus the outcomes that you feel stuck in. We do this through the Mindset Method, my psychological curriculum that I've curated with over 15 years experience and adapted it to you, the average woman, and this coaching program. This is one method, one program, one coach, and let's face it, the one area you've probably never done the work on. So if you're tired of spinning your wheels and wasting your money, check out the link below for more information. But what does your ego do, right? Objectively, nothing significant happened when you ate that meal, but the ego does not deal in objectivity. It deals in identity, and the identity, remember, I am the one who is in control, just got challenged. That slip does not feel like a Wednesday dinner. It feels like proof of the thing that the perfectionist has always feared the most. Underneath all the discipline, it is the I am not good enough. I cannot be trusted. I am not successful. I don't have discipline. That wounded child gets triggered. Step 3 is the spiral then comes, the shame spiral. The internal response is immediate, and it's disproportionate from what is going on. You did not just eat off plan, my dear. You failed. You have no willpower. You always do this. What is the point? The criticism is not constructive by any means. It is the internalized voice of every standard you taught yourself to hold. It is that critic, and it is loud. And this is a step that some people mistake as motivation. Healthy guilt says, I made a mistake. Shame says, I am the mistake. The internal dialogue stops evaluating behavior and starts attacking your identity. You are lazy. You are weak. You will never change. Everyone is going to see who you really are. And here's what most people miss. This brutal self-criticism actually feels like proof of standards. I am this hard on myself because I care this much. I've said that to myself. The harshness of the inner critic becomes evidence of how serious the perfectionist is. The shame, as painful as it fucking is, keeps the ego's identity as the high achiever intact. The ego is not breaking down here. It begins defending itself. Ugh. Just sit with that, y'all. Just sit with it. Your shame spiral initiates. It is this in this toxic relationship with your identity. And it says, no, I'm better than that. I'm better than this. I'm not a mistake. I'm great. And you have this tug of war in your mind. And what happens next is step 4, compensation or abandonment. So we talked about those one or two things happening. You either over restrict the next day to compensate, skipping meals, cutting calories, punishing your body for all that it did wrong, Or as I mentioned, you just abandon the plan entirely. You already failed, so Monday becomes the next start date, or January, or where the fuck you're at, right? The whole week is written off because you ate something at dinner on Wednesday. I know, mind-boggling, right? The ego cannot sit with the possibility that its identity has been disproven, so it moves quick. Compensation lets the ego recover control. Restriction, over exercise, or the ego saying, I can still fix this. I am still someone who corrects course. Abandonment does something a little bit different than that. It protects the ego from further evidence of failure by removing the test entirely, which is really important, because when we abandon the thing that we feel we're not perfecting, we say, well, I'm never going to have to see myself as imperfect because I just stopped doing the thing, right? And then Monday becomes a way of preserving the image of the person who tries without having to face what happened when they did try, because then they give up. Either way, these behaviors are not about growth. They're actually a way to escape that shame that you feel. And step 5 is you actually feel a little bit of success temporarily because it's silencing the shame. The restriction will work, the scale will move, the week ends up clean, and somehow comments on how disciplined you are for a moment start to quiet that shame in your head. Comments to yourself. The ego says, see, I really am enough as long as I keep performing. But this is not self-worth or esteem. Again, it's conditional acceptance, and conditional acceptance has a very clear expiration date. And the perfectionist is not building confidence here, true confidence. They're building false confidence here. They're building a case here, one that will need to be re-argued every single week for the rest of their lives. And here's the problem. We still have one more step, and that's step 6. You keep setting the motherfucking bar higher. Monday arrives, the plan gets set again, but this time stricter. Because last time you weren't disciplined enough, so the standard goes up higher and the loop begins again. Because shame was covered, it was not healed. So the ego raises the bar. Last week's plan is no longer enough. The rules get stricter. The margin for errors gets smaller. The next inevitable mistake, which will happen, right? Because guess what? You're human. Yay. Restarts the entire cycle, right? Except now the standard is higher, the shame hits harder, and the repair costs more. The ego never has to reckon with the only question that would actually break the cycle. What if the standard itself was the problem? This is a wiring problem. And the loop will keep running, my friends, until the identity underneath it gets examined, not the behaviors on top of it. Okay? Okay. Deep breath, everyone. In through the nose, out through the mouth. If you can't hear, I came back from Europe with a full-blown cold, like COVID-ass cold. It started when I was in Europe, and I just thought it was from singing at the top of my lungs for 3 days straight, but it wasn't. So taking a deep breath in through my nose was quite the challenge there. Anywho, so you guys can hear this. You can hear it in yourself. I have a client who is one of the most brilliant women that I know, and we have been working on this one thing for quite some time. And it is her tracking her food even when she cannot track it perfectly. And she would rather not track the days and not give me data on what she's eating than not be able to put it in perfectly. And again, she's like, I know it. I know this is the issue. But the ego says, you're not ready to face that the standard that you set to track everything perfectly is unrealistic. Because if you face that standard, then what else do you have to face? That you're imperfect. But let's get into like what this is doing to you in regards to your body and your goals. Perfectionism itself is not just a loop, right? And it's not just something that exhausts the shit out of you as someone who's been there. It has a physical cost. And most women in this cycle are not connecting their symptoms with the pattern driving their symptoms. And that's why I'm here. I'm here for that. Research shows that between 20 and 30% of adults report perfectionistic tendencies, and they linked those tendencies to anxiety, burnout, and emotional exhaustion, which I talked about. Over 76% of American workers report symptoms of exhaustion and emotional depletion, and perfectionists in particular are particularly vulnerable due to overcommitment and self-driven pressures. Every time the ego perceives a threat, every slip, every criticism, every missed workout, the body responds to that threat as a physical threat. Your cortisol spikes, your nervous system shifts into fight, flight, freeze, or please. And when this happens chronically, the body starts to break down. Your sleep suffers, there's inflammation in the body, there's fat storage, particularly around the midsection. Cravings intensify for the exact foods the perfectionist is trying to avoid. This is not your body betraying you. It is responding to a chronic alarm signal the ego is generating. That loop that the ego is creating is generating this signal. The pursuit of the perfect body, in many of these cases, is the very thing preventing a healthy one. Research found that women specifically who have maladaptive perfectionism, right, which are high standards combined with a large gap between those standards and perceived performance, are at a significant risk factor for an eating disorder or disordered eating. And a meta-analysis confirmed a consistent link between perfectionism and compulsive exercise across multiple studies. This loop does not just cost you your peace, it costs you your health. And on top of that, it costs you from creating the healthy habits that being imperfect with consistently will get you to where you want to be sooner. But being perfect or having a perfectionistic mentality around the healthy habits is going to just cause you to be at square one or the starting point every single week, day, whatever it is. I see this over and over and over again. And it could be said that perfectionists are neurodivergent, and that's why there's this, or even have some like OCD tendencies, why there's this force, as I talked about. But as someone who is in recovery of perfectionism, I know that we can start moving away from it, because this pattern can be the thing that once you tackle it, all of the rest, the eating plan, the exercise, it becomes so simple. It's so simple. But when the ego is driving that, it makes it very difficult. So let's talk about how to start moving away from it. Now, the goal with me is never lower your standards. I'm a high standard bitch, right? I like high standards. It is to examine the identity the standards are protecting. Okay, so like we've talked about, because every strategy, as I just mentioned, is just a new version of the same loop if we're looking at it, I should say, from the same identity. Okay, so we've got to name the ego when we see it. When the shame spiral begins to start after the missed workout or the off-plan meal, just name what's happening. My ego just interpreted a normal human moment as a threat to my identity or as a failure. This single act of recognition creates enough distance to help you respond differently. And you cannot interrupt the pattern, of course, if we're still in it. So if we can give ourselves some space, we have a new choice. Then we're going to separate our behavior, missed workout, meal out, from our identity. You ate off the plan. You're not someone who cannot be trusted. You missed a workout. You are not lazy. The behavior is data. It's not a verdict. Start practicing the language of healthy guilt. Like, I made a choice. I want to make differently next time. Or just actively retire this shame language that you have. Or just call it as it is. I missed a workout. That's all. I put in food in my fitness pal without using the scale. That's all. That's it. That's all it is. You've got to face the reality. When the ego starts to shame spiral, it's spewing lies at you. Your job is to recognize it, disconnect your behavior from the identity, and call it as the reality. If it is something you want to change, you say, next time I make a different choice. If it's something you just want to acknowledge as reality, you have radical acceptance. I missed a workout, the end. No in, ands, buts in between. And then we're going to replace that reset of like starting over again with repair. The reset says to you, I've failed, so I need to start over, right? I failed the test, so I have to do it again. We learned that in school. The repair says, Wednesday's night meal happens and Thursday I continue, right? One meal does not erase the week. One missed workout does not erase the month. It literally doesn't work that way. The repair keeps you in the loop of real life rather than cycling back to a fictional fresh start that you make up in your head. And this pattern is the one thing that the women who stay the leanest and healthiest almost effortlessly continue to do. They don't reset, right? They just come or restart, excuse me. They just come back to the next meal, the next workout, and they do that consistently. And that is, again, such a game changer. When you learn it and you practice it and you follow through with it, again, all this other stuff becomes simple. And you want to measure the consistency, not the perfection when we're doing this. 8 out of 10 days of showing up imperfectly beats 2 weeks of perfect adherence, followed by a complete abandonment for months at a time, right? That is not a compromise. That's actually how permanent health habits are built in real, imperfect conditions surrounding your actual life. And of course, when we get critical, we must get curious. When the slip happens, ask what was happening beforehand, right? Rather than asking what's wrong with me, like, what was happening during that time? Was I tired? Was I under eating earlier in that day? Was I stressed in a way that I hadn't really felt before? I don't know. Ask yourself what was happening. I had a client tell me, like, I thought I didn't need a plan, but I guess I was wrong. And when we started unraveling this situation that happened, so basically she went out with friends and they were having a good time. So she decided to stay longer, but she also had another event, going to a movie, that hour that she had between the shoot, they were shooting at a shooting range with friends, and then going to the movie was going to be when she would sit down and eat. And she's like, so I went home, she grabbed a bar, had some popcorn at the movie. And she's just like, I'm slipping into old patterns, this, that, the other. And I said, no. I think what happened here is you practice flexibility with your time, right? Instead of rigidity with your time. You were enjoying the moment, you stayed in the moment. What I would do there, instead of like this black or white perfect fail, is I said, how would we deal with this differently next time? Like, okay, well, I can't go all the way home because if I go all the way home, I'm not going to have time to eat. So is there somewhere I can stop, right? Get a sandwich, or, the Mindset of Matter has so many resources when it comes to fast food and all of that. Pick out one of those meals and then go to the movie. So then I'm fed, I have a meal. And it's not about skipping the meal. We were really just talking about she's in a deficit. When you're in a deficit, obviously eating whole foods is going to be your best friend. Eating those bars and the shakes and all of that are just going to keep you feeling very hungry. So it was an interesting conversation because she came from this place of almost like, I'm slipping into old behaviors, like all or nothing. And I was like, actually, I think this is a good thing. You practice some flexibility with your time. Now we have to have flexibility with your mind in order to create a new plan, right? And it's really about being compassionate, is what I was teaching her. And, research really shows us that self-compassion significantly moderates the relationship between perfectionism and disordered eating. This means that self-compassion is not just some like woo-woo fucking idea. It's clinically supported. It's a buffer against the damage that perfectionism and that loop does to your relationship with food, with your body, and with yourself, more importantly. The move away from perfectionism is not a single decision. I can tell you that. It is a daily practice of choosing your actual life and what actually is true for you over this perfectionistic version that was created for you, and trusting that the health you are building, right, can only be built there, right? The health that every single one of you are building is different, and it can only be built in the real version of you and your life, not the ideal one, not the one that someone else does, you. And that every person on this planet is an imperfect life. I hope you guys found this helpful today. I will talk about this subject until I'm blue in the face. It is a pattern of thinking, feeling, and doing that I understand, but still boggles my mind, because, you look at it from an outsider's perspective and you're just like, can't you see what you're doing here? You chose not to track 3 days of food because you couldn't do it perfectly, so you didn't do it at all. And you don't want to do it imperfectly because you think that you're going to gain weight, so you don't do it at all, which is the thing that's going to cause you to gain weight. Right? I know. It's quite frustrating, but luckily for me, I'm not only the founder of Perfectionism, I'm also a client. So, do you remember those commercials? Just for Men or whatever it was? Anyway, I love you guys. If you found this helpful, send it to that girl group. Send it to the mom group. All y'all moms out here are trying to do all this shit perfectly when you have 75 things to do at once. And you're like, yeah, and I'm also going to do them all perfectly. No, you're not. You might do a half of one perfectly. Everything else you're going to do enough. One of my surgeons, we talked about perfectionism and how much it fucked with her mind in surgery, even though in medical field, apparently they teach you that perfect is not what you should be reaching for. And we talked about the concept of striving for excellence. Excellence is great, but excellence is not perfectionism, right? Excellence is like, I'm going to do the best that I can in the circumstances I have. And as a surgeon, obviously, there are certain circumstances where she's got to pivot and move and do different things, and she's very good at her job. And when we kind of made that shift, it was really a game changer. So for your surgeon friends, I don't know where I was going with that. Please share this. Please share this podcast, you guys. I cannot ask you enough. I do not take I don't have any sponsors. I do this all on my own. And you would think like the podcast kind of feeds into the business. It does here and there, but I really do this to teach individuals who maybe can't afford coaching or don't feel like it's a part of their story right now. So if you could share this, if you can make sure, if you're watching on YouTube, you can hit that subscribe button. If you're listening in your ears on Apple or Spotify, there is a follow button. Downloads are a thing as well that the algorithm looks at. And I would love a new review if you haven't done one already. And that would be on Apple, 5 stars, Spotify, 5 stars. I don't know if you can review on YouTube, but anyway, I love you guys. Thank you for being here. And if you didn't figure this out already through this entire pod episode, I'm just going to remind you that what you say in your mind, you see in the mirror. Bye-bye.